In a world where most people depend on refrigerators, freezers, and packaged goods to keep their food fresh, the Amish continue to live by a different set of rules, ones that rely on nature, tradition, and hands-on knowledge. Without electricity, they've developed practical and reliable ways to store food that go back generations. These aren't just survival techniques, they're everyday habits woven into their lifestyle. From clever timing to creative storage spaces, each method reflects a deep understanding of how to make food last without modern conveniences. Here are 6 time-tested ways the Amish keep their food from spoiling, even without a single plug or switch. Number 1. Clay pot refrigeration. When the heat of summer settles in and there's no refrigerator buzzing in the background, the Amish turn to a quiet, clever little trick that doesn't need a single wire or switch to work. They make use of something called clay pot refrigeration. And though it might sound primitive at first, it's actually a brilliant example of natural cooling that keeps food from spoiling, even when the sun's baking the fields outside. At its core, it's a simple system. One unglazed clay pot placed inside another, with the space between them filled with damp sand. But the way it's used, the way it becomes a part of daily routine, is what makes it so effective and fascinating. Once the smaller pot is filled with whatever needs preserving, maybe a glass jar of fresh milk, a wrapped hunk of cheese, or even yesterday's leftover stew, it's carefully placed inside the larger pot. The surrounding sand, saturated just enough with water, starts doing the heavy lifting. As moisture slowly evaporates from the sand, it draws heat away from the inner pot, thanks to the natural physics of evaporation. It's not ice cold, but the drop in temperature is enough to keep dairy from turning sour too soon, or keep perishable food from spoiling overnight. The outer surface of the pot often feels slightly cool to the touch, especially if there's a bit of wind to help move the evaporation along. But what really makes this method practical is where it's placed. Amish families usually keep their clay pot fridges in shaded outdoor spots, under porches and lean-tos beside the kitchen, or under thick trees where the air is still but not stagnant. These locations enhance the cooling effect and shield the setup from direct sunlight, which would otherwise counteract everything. And it's not a set it and forget it system either. Someone, usually whoever's up first in the morning, checks the sand and adds water when needed, ensuring the evaporation cycle doesn't stall. That simple act becomes a part of the rhythm of the day, right alongside milking cows or kneading dough. Over time, the family just learns which foods do best in the clay pots, and how long they'll last. Butter holds up beautifully. Eggs will stay firm for a day or more. Even fruits like berries or sliced apples can get a little more life out of this setup. It's not just a survival hack, it's a way of working with nature instead of against it. And that's something the Amish have always done well. Number 2, communal butchering timing. Among the many time-tested practices the Amish follow to preserve food, one of the most strategic and quietly brilliant is how they time the butchering of large animals. They don't rely on gadgets or artificial storage. They rely on the season itself. When it comes time to slaughter hogs, beef cattle, or even multiple chickens, they wait until the weather turns cold. Late autumn, often just before the first heavy snow, and early winter, are ideal because the naturally low temperatures act like a massive outdoor refrigerator. There's no rush to throw meat into a freezer or worry about it spoiling mid-process, because the chilly air around them is doing most of the preservation work for free. This isn't just about convenience, it's deliberate. The Amish plan their entire butchering season around these colder months. And it's not done quietly behind closed doors either. It's communal, loud, messy, and highly organized. Multiple families often gather at one farm, especially if several households are preparing for the winter. Everyone brings something to the table. Some arrive with animals ready for slaughter, others come with tools, spices, or special equipment for grinding, smoking, or stuffing. It turns what could be a daunting solo task into something social, cooperative, and surprisingly efficient. Because everything has to be used quickly, there's no room for hesitation. They work fast and methodically. One area might be dedicated to cutting and sorting, another to rendering fat for lard, another for making sausages or preserving organs. The pace is steady and nothing is wasted. Not a bone, not a tendon, not even the blood in some recipes. Children often take part too, learning how to wrap cuts of meat in paper or help hang sausages in cool sheds to cure. It's messy work, but it carries weight and tradition, and there's real pride in getting it right. There's also a subtle wisdom behind it all. By aligning butchering with the season, they eliminate the need for refrigeration entirely. Meat can hang safely in a barn or shed for days while it's being processed, cured, or divided. That natural cooling effect doesn't cost a dime, and it lets them work with much larger quantities of food than would be possible in warmer months. Number 3, sand storage for root crops. After harvest season winds down and the last of the garden beds are cleared, Amish families turn to a method that looks almost too simple to be so effective: sand storage. Instead of relying on refrigeration or heavy processing to preserve their root crops, they use wooden crates, a few handfuls of moist sand, and a cool, dry space. Carrots, beets, parsnips, turnips, and sometimes even radishes are carefully packed away in layers of slightly damp, clean sand that's been sifted to remove debris. Each vegetable is positioned so it's not touching another, and the sand is packed gently around it, sealing it off from the air while still allowing it to breathe. What makes this method so effective is how it mimics the environment these vegetables came from in the first place. Underground, roots naturally stay firm and moist through the colder months, protected by soil from rapid temperature changes and light exposure. Sand storage essentially recreates those same conditions, allowing the vegetables to remain in a kind of suspended animation. They don't shrivel, they don't mold, and they don't spoil the way they might sitting out in the open. The moisture in the sand is just enough to prevent dehydration, but not so much that it encourages rot. The process of setting up these crates is methodical. The sand is moistened slightly, just enough so it clumps lightly when squeezed, and then a layer is poured into the bottom of the box. Each root vegetable is placed upright as though still growing, and then surrounded by more sand until the box is full. Lids aren't sealed tight. They're often covered loosely with cloth or wood to allow airflow. Then the boxes are stacked in cold storage areas, usually in barns, sheds, or underground cellars where the temperature stays just above freezing but never dips too low. These places are naturally dark and quiet, which helps the crops last even longer. Months later, in the dead of winter, someone might open a box and pull out a carrot that's still crisp and sweet, as if it had just been harvested. There's no noise, no electricity, no packaging, just patience, knowledge, and respect for the natural rhythms of food. This method doesn't just preserve produce, it preserves self-sufficiency. Number 4, syrup preservation. In Amish kitchens, where tradition blends seamlessly with practicality, preserving food isn't just about survival, it's about craftsmanship. One often overlooked method they use, especially for delicate fruits, is syrup preservation. It's a technique that doesn't involve boiling jars in big pots or sealing lids with vacuum tightness. Instead, it relies on a thick, sugary syrup that not only keeps the fruit from spoiling, but transforms it into something richer, sweeter, and surprisingly long-lasting. The process begins with the fruit itself. Peaches, cherries, pears, and various berries are among the most popular choices for this method. These are usually picked at their peak ripeness, when their flavor is full and their texture firm. The fruit is gently washed, peeled if needed, and trimmed of any blemishes or overly soft spots. Once prepared, it's set aside while the syrup is made. This syrup isn't just a splash of sweetness, it's dense, often made with a ratio of sugar to water that's closer to a glaze than a drink. The goal is to create a high-sugar environment that inhibits bacteria and molds from taking hold. Once the syrup is heated and the sugar fully dissolved, the fruit is added in small batches to avoid over-softening. The fruit isn't cooked completely, it's warmed just enough to absorb the sweetness without losing its structure. Then, everything is ladled carefully into sterilized glass jars, with syrup poured in to completely submerge the fruit. A tight-fitting lid is added, and the jars are stored in a dark, cool place. Pantries with stone walls, shaded wooden shelves, or underground cellars where the temperature stays consistently low. What's especially clever about this method is how it creates two products in one jar. The fruit soaks in the syrup for weeks or even months, slowly giving up its natural juices and soaking in the sugar. The result is a soft, flavorful fruit perfect for spooning over biscuits, stirring into oatmeal, or layering into pies. Meanwhile, the syrup itself becomes infused with all those fruit notes and can be used in baking, teas, or even poured over pancakes. It's not just preservation, it's enhancement. The fruit doesn't just last longer, it becomes more versatile. There's something almost luxurious about opening a jar in midwinter and finding peaches that taste like late July. And all of it made without a refrigerator in sight. Number 5. Cold water bucket storage. In the quiet rhythm of Amish life, where technology takes a backseat and tradition carries the day, even the most basic resources are used with surprising precision. One such example is how they preserve perishable foods using naturally cold water. Something as ordinary as a bucket becomes a smart, low-effort way to keep milk, butter, or cream from going bad. The method is simple on the surface, but when you look closer, you see how intentional it really is. It all centers around the idea that if refrigeration isn't available, cold water drawn from the earth can be the next best thing. Many Amish homes, especially those situated near reliable wells or natural springs, make regular use of water that stays at a consistent low temperature, usually between 45 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit. This is cool enough to noticeably slow down spoilage without freezing the contents. They use sturdy, tightly sealed containers, often glass jars with metal clasps or heavy ceramic crocks, to hold whatever needs keeping cool. These containers are then placed inside a bucket, which is lowered into the well, or in some cases, into a deep, stone-lined trough or basin filled with cold groundwater. The deeper the container sits, the better the cooling effect. As temperature tends to drop, the farther down you go. In homes with hand-dug wells, it's not uncommon to see ropes or pulley systems used to gently lower and raise the buckets. Sometimes the containers are tied to weighted boards that sit under the water surface to keep them steady and fully submerged. The family members who tend to cooking or milking know the drill well. Early in the morning, before the heat picks up, someone might lower a fresh jug of milk into the well, then later retrieve it just in time for breakfast or baking. It's a small act, but it makes a difference. This setup doesn't replace long-term storage methods, and it's not meant to. Instead, it acts as a short-term buffer. When the weather is hot and leftovers can't be left sitting out, or when there's fresh butter that needs to stay firm until dinner, this method steps in to buy a few extra hours. It's the kind of old-world ingenuity that shows how something as ordinary as a bucket of cold water, when used wisely, becomes a reliable way to stretch freshness just a little further. Number 6. Controlled humidity storage rooms. In larger Amish households where food is produced in abundance, sometimes enough to feed a dozen or more people through the long winter, preservation isn't just about individual techniques, it's about space. That's where controlled humidity storage rooms come into play. These aren't mechanical pantries with thermostats or digital readouts. Instead, they're thoughtfully built spaces that take full advantage of natural air movement, insulation, and moisture control to keep food stable for weeks or even months. Every detail is calculated, not with a computer, but with a generational understanding of how air and materials behave in enclosed spaces. These rooms are often located either partially underground or inside structures with thick stone or brick walls that hold cool air longer. The placement is no accident. Being below ground helps maintain a steady temperature, especially during seasonal shifts. What sets these storage areas apart, though, is the way they manage airflow. Vents are installed low on one wall to pull in cooler air from the outside, while another vent is placed higher up on the opposite wall or ceiling to allow warm air to escape naturally. This circulation, powered entirely by the rising and falling of air temperatures, creates a slow but steady movement that reduces stagnation and helps regulate humidity. Inside, shelves are made of unfinished wood, something that absorbs excess moisture while still allowing air to pass freely. Items are spaced out, not packed tightly, so that each jar of preserves, each wheel of cheese, and each basket of eggs gets its own pocket of breathable space. Slatted wooden floors or raised platforms keep storage off the ground, away from any rising dampness. This setup also prevents mold from forming underneath crates or jars, which can be a common issue in sealed storage environments. What's remarkable is how the Amish monitor the moisture levels and temperature without modern tools. Some families sprinkle salt on small saucers to test the air, if the salt clumps the room is too humid. Others rely on touch, checking the walls and wooden beams for any sign of condensation. Adjustments are made by slightly widening vents, increasing airflow, or adding or removing straw bales that act as insulation buffers. It's a smart, silent system that doesn't beep, blink, or buzz, but it works. Through a mix of intuition, routine observation, and handmade design, these rooms become climate-controlled zones that don't need electricity to do their job. They're another example of how the Amish match knowledge and nature to preserve what they've grown with care.